Hi. Who's Brian O'Hare? Brian O'Hare is an old guy who plays a lot of golf and writes a bit. About 23 years ago, when I was about 60, I had to take early retirement from my post of Deputy Director of a large regional college here in Northern Ireland. My health was deteriorating, and to cut a long story short, about 4 or 5 years later, I was almost dead when I got a liver transplant, just in time to save my life. But now I'm perfectly healthy. I play 3 rounds of golf a week. I walk a lot. I love to read, and I like to watch television as well. I play chess. And from time to time I try, without any great success, to learn how to speak French fluently, because my wife and I love to go to the south of France for a month or so every year. My wife is Sadie. She and I will be married this year 58 years. And we have 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. That's Brian O'Hare. A bit boring. No, I haven't. I was a voracious reader from a very early young age, but I never thought about writing. In fact, I got into writing quite by accident. The truth is, I was actually a writer, writing before I knew I was a writer. That might need explained. It was like this. When I was a young college lecturer, I somehow or another came to the attention of the senior staff inspector of the Department of Education in Northern Ireland. And in no time at all, he had me attending this meeting, that week-long course, this weekend conferences, asking me to write up the proceedings in a report format. And then some of these reports would be distributed throughout the British Isles. In fact, on one occasion he asked me to take a year off work and go and do research in France and in Holland and in Germany, all over England and all over the north of Ireland. That was hard work. And at the end of that I wrote a book-length report, which also was distributed throughout the length and breadth of the British Isles. Now, if you'd said to me after that, if I was holding that report in my hand, "So you're a writer?" I would have said, "No. I'm a college lecturer who produces academic reports." But after I retired, I changed around a wee bit. That liver transplant that I was talking about, I had 2 very fraught years, almost died. And I decided to write the story. And it was published by a Dublin publisher, and later on republished by Crimson Cloak in America. And it was published with extra chapters at the end to bring it up to date. I don't know if you can see it or not. This is it here. And when I held that in my hand, I wondered if I could be a writer. But there was a problem. It was non-fiction. All of my reports were non-fiction. So I always thought that non-fiction was pretty straightforward. It's all there. You just go and look for the information, the facts that you want to talk about, and then you write them down. You don't actually produce anything or create anything in your head. Fiction is different. Fiction, you start with a completely blank canvas. You have to create a whole new world. You have to create people to live in that world. You have to create situations where they interact and interrelate. Sometimes it all goes wrong and you have to bring it all back together again in a nice little bundle at the end. That requires creativity, and to my mind that was writing. I feel a little bit different about it now, but at the time I thought you had to write fiction to be a writer. And so I decided I would try to write a fiction book, and I wrote one called Fallen Men, a contemporary Irish novel And when I held that in my hand after it was published, I thought, well, maybe I can be a writer. And but my favourite reading genre at that time was crime, mysteries, thrillers. So I didn't think I could do it, but I thought I'd have a go at writing one myself. And I sent it to Crimson Cloak Publishing in America. And the owner, Carly McCracken, liked it and published it. And then she said, maybe you should write a series with this Inspector Sheehan that I was writing about in the first book. So I said I would give it a try. And now I have just published the 5th book in that series. It's called The Trafficking Murders. I don't know if you can see this or not. Hold it back a bit. The Trafficking Murders. That is the book that actually sparked this interview. No, I know that National Awareness Day for Trafficking is now on the 11th of January. I didn't know that at the time. My book being published around this time was a coincidence. Every time I write a book, I take a few months off. Then I write a book, that takes a few months. Then it goes to the publisher. That takes the best part of a year before it appears in print. So you're talking maybe 20 months. So no, I couldn't have judged that. That was a coincidence. Well, when I was doing my research, I was only thinking about writing a story. I wanted to write each of the Inspector Sheehan books is very different from the other ones. But they all have one thing in common. A few murders happen. The inspector and his team try to solve them. And one evening I was reading an article in a newspaper about a trafficking house that was raided by the police in Belfast, near where I live. They got 4 traffickers and 26 victims. And the story in the paper was horrible. But at the same time I was thinking maybe I could write a novel in that context. So that was what I did. It was just meant to be a story. I couldn't make it a polemic about human trafficking if you ask if there are any warnings or anything. But during my research, I became very much aware of the terrible, sadistic, cruel nature of the people who carry out this crime and the awful things that happen to the victims. And one of the poor young ladies in my book, one of the principal characters, is a young Romanian woman called Alina. Now, Alina does suffer some stuff that makes for uncomfortable reading, but what she suffers is pretty much the reality of what all the other young ladies in the sex trade have to suffer at the hands of traffickers. So in that sense, the book does give some kind of a warning or some kind of messages about the nature of this awful trade. These people operate in hidden situations. They're almost invisible. They keep out of the public eye and work in the dark. During that raid that I was reading about in the paper, one of the inspectors that was involved said, he gave it the full name, "Human trafficking and modern slavery is a hidden crime, hidden in plain sight. People need to be told about it and to know about it." Just wondering maybe if this big national day, and there are national days all over the world about it, may be part of the solution. Well, when I was doing my research, I found many references to agencies and foundations all over the world, maybe 70 or 80 of them, who are trying to combat this awful crime, to bring awareness to the public consciousness about it so that they can somehow help block it. They also have all sorts of little sub-organisations trying to help the victims and look after them and give them succour after they're rescued. The honest truth is, from what I can read, they are not succeeding all that well. That's not any big surprise. There are some statistics that would give you maybe something of a shock. There are worldwide about 20 million victims of trafficking, and about 5 million of those are trafficked into the sex trade, young women, and the other 15 million are men and children who are trafficked into forced labour or slavery. 20 million victims. There's a lot of money in that, and just exactly how much was estimated last year. These people that are engaged in this industry, if you want to call it that, earn something in the region of $750 billion a year worldwide. $750 billion a year. These people are not going to give up those kind of profits easily, and so they keep themselves concealed, they hide away, they avoid arrest, they avoid capture. And this is where the problem lies. The book is only just published. It's not something I could say, but I tell you, just a couple of days ago, I was asked by a friend of mine to write a little piece for her blog. She's going to write a review of the Trafficking Murders, and she wanted a piece from me about trafficking. And when I was looking that up, one of the things I decided to have a look at what reviewers were saying about the book. Even though it's only just published, there are about 18 reviews now on Goodreads. And I'll just read a couple of them here to make the point. One lady said, "I only had a vague idea about human trafficking before I read this book, but I now know that readers would get a clear picture of what human trafficking victims go through, because what happens to the victims in this book is based on real life experiences." And another lady emailed me. She wanted to thank me for writing the book. And she said in her email that it had the potential to raise awareness of this terrible crime and do some good. And one more, there was a gentleman, a writer himself. He said, "Without dwelling too much on the more gruesome aspects of this growing threat to poor and displaced people, the author uses his power of description to draw a highly realistic image of this chilling, cold-blooded world of modern slavers." So it seems that the reviewers and people are listening and paying attention. Maybe you should too.